Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail on a journey through time to explore a group of remarkable women who defied the norms and became some of history's most infamous pirates. Picture the roaring ocean waves, the salty air stinging your skin, and the creaking of wooden ships as they cut through the vast untamed seas. It's a world filled with danger, freedom, and audacity. But here's the twist. You probably won't survive this pirate life, not unless you were as tough as some of these ladies. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I always love to hear where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As we begin, we're going back to a time when piracy wasn't just a job for grizzled men with eye patches and dirty beards. Yes, there were women on the high seas too, and they weren't just passengers. These women chose piracy in a world that didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat for them. The Golden Age of Piracy, from the late 1600s to the early 1700s, was a time when the lawless world of pirates was thriving, and some women, often forgotten in history, became integral parts of these wild crews. They were motivated by different things: freedom from oppressive lives, the promise of wealth, and the chance to escape the traditional roles they were expected to play. Historians still argue whether these women joined pirate ships out of necessity or whether they had a genuine desire for adventure. But one thing's clear: they weren't your average sailors. They became fierce and often notorious figures, shaking up the expectations of their time. As we continue our journey, let's take a closer look at these remarkable women. Who exactly were they? What drove them to defy the roles society had carved out for them? Let's meet some of the most famous female pirates who sailed the seas and left a legacy that still lingers in our collective imagination today. You might already know about Anne Bonny and Mary Read, the most infamous female pirate duo to ever sail the Caribbean. Anne Bonny was born in Ireland in the late 17th century and made a name for herself as a fierce and cunning pirate. She wasn't just the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner. She was someone who actively sought out the freedom and excitement that came with a life of piracy. Historians still argue whether Anne's rebellious nature was simply a product of her rebellious spirit, or whether she was deeply influenced by the strict, constricting roles expected of women in her time. Either way, Anne dressed as a man, and it's said that she fought fiercely alongside male pirates, earning respect and fear in equal measure. Then there's Mary Read, whose story is just as intriguing and full of twists and turns. Mary was born in England, and her early life was a tale of deception. She was raised as a boy to inherit her deceased brother's inheritance, a ruse that kept her under the radar for many years. Eventually, Mary found herself on pirate ships, where she partnered with Anne Bonny. Historians still debate whether their relationship was purely professional or whether it involved a deeper connection. But together, they were a fearsome force on the high seas. Their partnership was more than just a pirate duel. It was a bond that helped each woman navigate a world where they were constantly fighting against expectations and prejudices. Of course, Anne and Mary weren't the only female pirates. There were others, like Charlotte de Barry, a legendary figure whose life was steeped in myth. Although some of her exploits are likely exaggerated, her story showcases the romanticized idea of female pirates that has persisted throughout history. Charlotte was said to have commanded a pirate ship all on her own, defying all expectations of women's roles in the 17th century. Now that we've met some of the bold women who sailed the high seas, it's time to dive deeper into the realities of piracy during the Golden Age. What did it mean to be a pirate in the 17th and 18th centuries? What laws governed pirate life? And how did women fit into these systems? Spoiler alert, the rules were complicated, and often women pirates found themselves walking a fine line between survival and survival of the fittest. Piracy, for all its romantic appeal, wasn't a free-for-all. There was a pirate code, an unwritten set of rules that governed how crews functioned. These rules set the stage for everything from how treasure was divided to how disputes were settled. The pirate code was about fairness, or at least a rough approximation of fairness. Ships that operated under the most well-known pirate codes, like those followed by Blackbeard and Bartholomew Roberts, had strict divisions of labor. There were clear roles, from the captain all the way down to the deckhands. This hierarchical structure was necessary for the chaos of pirate life to function. For women who joined pirate crews, the question of role and status was murkier. Historians still debate whether women had to disguise themselves to avoid being ostracized, or whether there was a certain amount of acceptance among the crew members. While some women, like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, dressed as men to avoid detection, others may have been able to keep their gender a secret for much longer. However, this gender deception was rarely about anything more than survival. It wasn't about blending in, it was about staying alive. Women pirates, when caught, would often face accusations that could be more severe than those faced by men, an idea that highlights the precarious nature of their positions in pirate society. But why didn't women simply stick to more traditional roles in society? Well, for many of them, it wasn't just about taking part in piracy for the thrill or riches. The reality of the time was that women were largely excluded from many economic and social opportunities. Their futures were often predetermined by family or marriage, leaving little room for autonomy or independence. For these women, piracy was not just a way to escape, it was a way to escape into something bigger, a chance to wield power in a world that had told them their only value was in their ability to marry or bear children. So when women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read found themselves on pirate ships, it wasn't just a question of being an outlaw, it was a question of agency. For them, the law of piracy was preferable to the legal constraints placed on women in the societies they came from. It's no surprise that piracy offered them a sense of liberation, a feeling that would have been hard to come by in the traditional roles they would have faced in their respective homelands. Historians still argue whether these women, who dressed as men or kept their identities secret, were accepted as equals among the pirate crew members, or whether they remained outsiders, forced to keep their true selves hidden. But one thing is certain: pirates' laws, though harsh, offered women pirates a level of freedom not found in the rigid societal norms of their time. By now, we've uncovered the life of female pirates during the Golden Age and their place in the wider world of piracy. But what did life actually look like on a pirate ship for women? Was it just a matter of finding treasure and making enemies? Or did women take on unique roles that made their experience different from their male counterparts? Pirate ships were chaotic, lawless places, but they were also communities where survival depended on cooperation, no matter how ruthless that cooperation was. It wasn't all swashbuckling and treasure hunting. The duties aboard a pirate ship were demanding, ranging from sailing and navigating to cleaning the deck and managing supplies. While women may have initially been outsiders, they quickly learned how to adapt to this harsh world. For women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, adapting to life aboard a pirate ship wasn't just about keeping their gender a secret. It was about surviving in an environment where every day was a challenge. Many pirates viewed women as good luck charms, a view steeped in superstition and mythology. Some believed that having a woman on board would bring good fortune and prosperity. In fact, Anne Bonny's presence on pirate ships was said to inspire confidence in her fellow pirates. Despite this, female pirates didn't simply serve as tokens of luck or decoration. They fought, just like the men. On the notorious pirate ship Revenge, where Anne Bonny sailed under the command of the infamous Captain Calico Jack Rackham, Bonny was known for her fierce temper and combat skills. She didn't sit idly by while the men fought. She joined in, sword in hand, to fend off the British Navy when it came for them. Historians still argue whether Bonny's desire to fight was a reaction to the feeling of being marginalized, or whether it was simply the result of her personality, a fiery, rebellious nature that couldn't be tamed by societal norms. While Anne Bonny and Mary Read were exceptional in their willingness to fight alongside men, many female pirates played more tactical roles. Women were often invaluable when it came to maintaining the ship's operations. They took on critical tasks such as cooking, maintaining weaponry, and even acting as spies. Their roles were diverse, and while not as widely acknowledged as their male counterparts, women pirates played an integral part in ensuring their ships stayed afloat. Though pirate ships were rife with violence and danger, they were also spaces where women had the opportunity to thrive. In fact, for many women, piracy offered them the only form of autonomy they could find during this time. The brutality of life on a pirate ship was in many ways easier to endure than the oppressive constraints placed on women back on land. Aboard these ships, women could be themselves, free from the expectations of society. Historians still debate whether women truly gained equality on pirate ships. But one thing is clear: the roles women played in piracy were far more varied than the popular image of a pirate queen in a flowing dress. Women had to fight for their place, and they did so with both brains and brawn. The reality of pirate life, though violent and lawless, was a canvas upon which these women could paint their own destinies. As we venture deeper into the world of female pirates, it's impossible to ignore the Golden Age of Piracy itself. A time when the seas were teeming with outlaw crews, chaos and opportunity. The late 1600s to early 1700s, marked by lawlessness and adventure, was a golden time for pirates, and for women looking to escape society's constraints, it was a chance to break free. But how did these women navigate this wild, untamed world? The Golden Age of Piracy wasn't just about the handful of infamous pirates we know today. It was a time of expanding European empires, naval dominance, and a growing fascination with the sea. For pirates, the oceans represented an almost infinite space to claim and conquer. But for women, the pirate world was also one of opportunity. a chance to escape from the confining roles set out for them by their families, their societies, and their genders. Women who turned to piracy often found it a way out of domestic servitude, unwanted marriages, or poverty. For some, it was even a better life than what was available to them in the colonies or back in their homelands. Yet, as appealing as piracy seemed, it wasn't just a walk on the deck under the warm Caribbean sun. Pirate ships, like those captained by Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, or Bartholomew Roberts, had one fundamental rule: survival of the fittest. It didn't matter if you were a man or a woman. You had to prove yourself. And that was no small feat. In fact, many female pirates had to work harder to prove they were just as capable as their male counterparts. They were expected to be just as brave, just as brutal, and just as skilled in combat and navigation. For women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, the challenges were immense. They had to constantly prove their worth in an environment that was largely hostile to their presence. But despite the obstacles, they found acceptance among their crews, at least for a time. Anne Bonny, for example, proved herself as a fierce fighter. She was said to have fought valiantly during the famous battle between Calico Jack's crew and the British Navy. Historians still argue whether her fight was driven by survival instinct or a desire to prove herself as an equal to the men. But either way, she wasn't afraid to raise a sword in the heat of battle. However, historians still debate the significance of women's involvement in piracy during the Golden Age. Was it simply a short-lived anomaly, or did it represent something larger, a reflection of women's desire for autonomy in a society that typically confined them to the home? Some believe that the brief rise of female pirates is a symbol of the freedoms that could be achieved outside of the rigid gender roles of the time. Others argue that women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read were simply exceptional outliers who managed to carve out a small space for themselves in a world dominated by men. Regardless of where you fall on the debate, the Golden Age of Piracy was, without a doubt, a defining period for these women and for the future of piracy itself. As we continue this journey into the Golden Age of Piracy, we come across a fascinating question. Did female pirates, like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, truly experience equality on the pirate ships, or were they simply tolerated because of their unique skills and contributions? Historians still argue whether these women were fully accepted, or if they had to hide their identities to survive in a world where gender roles were strictly defined. For many women pirates, their true identities were kept a secret for as long as possible. Anne Bonny, for example, dressed as a man for much of her pirate career. She took on the name Andy Bonny to blend in with the male pirates she sailed with. This wasn't just a tactic to avoid unwanted attention, it was a necessity. The pirate world was, after all, a dangerous place, where anyone not conforming to the unspoken rules of the crew could quickly find themselves at the mercy of the rest of the men. By dressing as a man, Anne could gain a certain level of acceptance and freedom within the pirate world. Mary Read, too, employed a similar strategy. Her life was already one of disguise and deception, long before she became a pirate. Raised as a boy to inherit her deceased brother's estate, Mary was no stranger to the art of passing as someone she was not. She continued this disguise when she joined the pirate crew and worked alongside Anne Bonny, often keeping her true identity hidden from the rest of the crew for as long as possible. Despite their need for secrecy, both women played crucial roles on their ships. Anne Bonny was known for her fiery temperament and courage in battle. She fought as fiercely as any man aboard the ship, earning the respect of her crewmates despite her gender. Mary Read, equally skilled in combat, also fought bravely and proved herself a valuable asset. While historians still debate whether their gender was ever fully acknowledged by their fellow pirates, one thing is clear: the roles these women played were undeniably important. Their courage and willingness to fight were just as integral to the success of their pirate crews as any male pirates. But beyond the fierce battles and tactical roles, there were other nuances to life as a female pirate. While women like Anne and Mary proved themselves on the battlefield, there was still the question of how they were perceived on the ships. Were they simply tolerated for their fighting prowess, or did they actually gain some level of respect? Some believe that the pirate crews in their lawless world didn't necessarily adhere to the same gender norms that were rigidly enforced in society at the time. A pirate crew needed strength and skill, and if a woman could provide that, then her gender might not matter as much as it would have on land. Historians still argue whether women pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read were ever fully accepted, or if they were always seen as outsiders in some sense. Some say they had to prove themselves more than their male counterparts, constantly fighting to earn respect. Others argue that, in the anarchic world of piracy, gender didn't carry as much weight as it did on land, and women pirates could find a place based purely on their abilities. Regardless of the debates, there's no denying that women pirates were breaking barriers. They weren't just symbols of rebellion. They were active participants in a world that demanded respect through strength and skill. The question of whether they were truly equal to their male counterparts might never be fully answered, but the fact that they existed in the first place speaks volumes about the kind of world they helped shape. Now, let's take a closer look at one of the most famous female pirates of all time, Anne Bonny. Her life was filled with adventure, mystery, and defiance. But how did this Irish-born woman come to be one of the most infamous pirates of the Caribbean? And what happened when her world came crashing down? Anne Bonny's story begins in Ireland, where she was born to a wealthy plantation owner and his maid. As a child, she was often described as fiery, rebellious, and unapologetically independent. traits that were unusual for a woman of her time. Raised in a privileged household, Anne could have easily married well and lived a comfortable life. But the allure of freedom and adventure was too strong. After her father's fortune dwindled, Anne moved to the colonies, where she began living under a false identity, dressed as a man, and took up a life of piracy. It was in the Caribbean that Anne Bonny's name began to resonate with fear and respect. She joined the infamous pirate crew led by the notorious Calico Jack Rackham. Anne wasn't just a passenger, she became an active participant, fighting alongside the men on her ship. She was known for her courage in battle, often taking up arms during skirmishes, showing no hesitation to cut down enemies with the same ferocity as any pirate. In fact, her name became synonymous with pirate brutality. But there was more to Anne than just her fighting prowess. Anne Bonny's transformation into a pirate wasn't solely motivated by the promise of treasure. It was also driven by her quest for autonomy. As a woman in a male-dominated society, her choices were limited. Piracy offered her a chance to escape the confines of societal expectations and live a life based on her own terms. But Anne's pirate career wasn't without its complications. Her gender was always a secret, at least until she met Mary Read, who, like her, had a similar story of living under false identities. Together, they formed a formidable pair, and Anne's fiery temper and sharp wit earned her a place in pirate history. However, Anne's fate took a dramatic turn when her crew was captured by the British Navy. The capture of Anne Bonny and her fellow pirates was a turning point, and the events that followed are shrouded in mystery. Some say Anne escaped her fate. Anne Bonny's story, though mysterious, is a testament to the resilience and strength of female pirates. She lived a life of defiance, breaking all the rules to carve out a space for herself in a world that expected women to be nothing more than wives or daughters. And in doing so, she became a symbol of the audacity and courage that defined the Golden Age of Piracy. Now let's shift our focus to Mary Read, the other half of the infamous pirate duo. Mary's story is just as intriguing as Anne Bonny's, filled with deception, courage, and a desire to escape the constraints placed upon her. Born in England, Mary's early life was marked by secrecy and survival, a pattern that would follow her all the way to the pirate ships of the Caribbean. Mary Read's childhood was far from ordinary. Her mother, a woman of resourceful but questionable means, decided to dress Mary as a boy in order to collect the inheritance intended for her late brother. For years, Mary lived as a boy, enduring the hardships of growing up under a false identity. Her mother's ruse allowed Mary to inherit her brother's fortune, but it also set the stage for Mary to lead a life filled with constant deception. As Mary grew older, she continued to live as a man, joining the military and later traveling across Europe before eventually finding herself aboard a pirate ship. It was here, on the high seas, that Mary finally met Anne Bonny. The two became fast friends, sharing stories of their extraordinary lives and struggles as women in a world that demanded they live under a mask. Historians still debate the nature of their relationship. Was it one of friendship, mutual respect, or something more intimate? The truth remains elusive, but their bond was undeniable. Together, they became part of the crew led by Calico Jack Rackham, a pirate whose name is forever intertwined with theirs. Mary Read didn't just sit idly by on the ship. Much like Anne, she took part in every battle, every raid, and every plunder. She didn't just passively go along for the ride, she was an active, determined member of the crew. Her reputation as a fearsome pirate was solidified when, during an attack, she was captured alongside Anne. In fact, when the British Navy captured Calico Jack's ship, it was Mary and Anne who fought the hardest to defend it, guns blazing, refusing to surrender without a fight. But what happened after their capture? Like Anne, Mary Read faced a grim future. She was sentenced to hang, but it was not to be. While Anne Bonny's fate is shrouded in mystery, the details of Mary Read's end are a little clearer. Mary fell ill in prison, possibly due to a fever, and died before she could face execution. Some say she died in a feverish haze, possibly a result of the life she had led as a pirate, living on the edge of survival. Historians still argue about whether Mary's death was a form of poetic justice, or if it was simply the tragic end of a woman who had lived a life of rebellion and defiance. Mary Read's story, like Anne's, is one of extraordinary courage and an unrelenting will to live on her own terms. She was never just another woman on a pirate ship. She was a force to be reckoned with. Her ability to maintain her disguise, her fighting skills, and her resilience in the face of impossible odds made her an integral part of pirate lore. Yet, like many women pirates, her story has been overshadowed by the more famous men of piracy, with her legacy often relegated to the margins of history. But the truth is that Mary Read, much like Anne Bonny, proved that piracy was not just a man's world. It was a world where women could carve out their own space, fight for their survival, and leave a lasting mark. As we delve further into the world of female pirates, we arrive at a crucial point. What was life really like for these women once they were captured? It's one thing to fight and live freely on the open sea, but the realities of capture were much harsher for pirates. And women pirates faced their own unique set of challenges. When a pirate ship was captured, the fate of the crew was often grim. The British Navy had no mercy for pirates, who were seen as nothing more than criminals and outlaws. Men were often executed either by hanging or sometimes by more gruesome means. But what happened to women pirates? Could they escape this brutal fate, or were they held to the same harsh standards? In many cases, female pirates who were caught were sentenced to the same fate as their male counterparts. Anne Bonny and Mary Read were both captured after a dramatic battle at sea, their ship overtaken by the British Navy. They were arrested, tried for piracy, and sentenced to hang. The standard pirate punishment was death, and the woman faced this grim possibility as well. Yet, in some cases, the fate of female pirates wasn't as clear-cut. Some women were allowed to go free, often under mysterious circumstances, while others were imprisoned. Anne Bonny's fate, for instance, remains one of history's great mysteries. After her capture, she was sentenced to hang, but she somehow disappeared from historical records. Some believe that she escaped, possibly with Calico Jack, while others speculate that she was released due to her pregnancy, which would have delayed her execution. Historians still argue over the details of her escape or release. Was it simply a clever ruse, or was it an act of mercy because of her gender? We may never know, but her disappearance left room for speculation and myths to fill in the gaps. Mary Read's fate, however, is a bit clearer. She died in prison from a fever before she could be executed. Her death was likely the result of the harsh conditions in the prison, combined with the physical toll that piracy took on her body. But while Mary's death was sad and untimely, it was far from unique. Many pirates died in prison before they could face the hangman's noose. The harsh conditions of pirate life, constant battles, illness, and the struggle for survival. The lives of captured female pirates also raised interesting legal questions. Some women, like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, were tried as pirates, but others may have been spared execution due to the perception that they were somehow less dangerous than their male counterparts. The idea that women were incapable of the same kind of brutality that men were often accused of has been debated by historians. Some believe that female pirates were seen as mere outlaws, while others argue that their roles were minimized and romanticized because of the way women were viewed in society at the time. Historians still argue over whether female pirates were given special treatment after their capture, or if they were treated exactly like men. Some suggest that women pirates, due to their rarity, were not as feared as their male counterparts, which may have allowed them to receive slightly more lenient treatment. Others argue that their gender may have made their punishment even harsher, as they were breaking both societal and maritime laws. Regardless of how they were treated, the fate of female pirates after capture was often a tragic one. Death, imprisonment, or disappearing into obscurity were the common outcomes. Yet, despite the harsh consequences, these women left behind a legacy that has endured through the centuries. They became legends, symbols of defiance and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And while their stories may have been overshadowed by the more famous pirate men, their place in history remains undeniable. As we explore the lives of female pirates, it's essential to look at the larger narrative that surrounds their roles in piracy. For centuries, piracy has been romanticized, glamorized in stories and films, often with a focus on male figures. But where do female pirates fit into this story? And how has their legacy been shaped through time? When we think of pirates today, many images come to mind. The rugged, swashbuckling adventurer with a sword at their side and a bottle of rum in hand. But buried within this iconic image are the stories of women who challenged gender norms and carved their own place in pirate history. Yet, the lives of these women have often been marginalized, their stories lost in favor of their male counterparts. Women pirates have been romanticized, their exploits exaggerated or misinterpreted to fit within the prevailing narratives of their time. Take, for example, the myth of the pirate queen. The notion of a woman leading a pirate crew with the same authority as a male captain has endured in stories passed down through the centuries. Characters like Anne Bonny and Mary Read have become symbols of strength and rebellion, but how much of their story is factual and how much has been distorted over time? Historians still argue whether these women were truly as daring and successful as the stories suggest, or if their stories have simply been enhanced by later generations. One of the key aspects of their enduring legacy is the way in which these women have been mythologized. In many ways, their roles as pirates have been romanticized and distorted in popular culture. Women who were seen as outcasts or rebels during their lifetimes have since been transformed into powerful figures, almost mythical in their scope. The pirate queen myth in particular highlights how history often amplifies certain aspects of a person's story, particularly if their actions go against societal expectations. The truth is that the lives of female pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read were often far less glamorous than the legends suggest. They fought to survive in a harsh, unforgiving world, where the line between freedom and death was often razor thin. But the myths surrounding their lives continue to shape how we view them today, often overshadowing the very real struggles they faced in life. Despite their challenges, these women played an undeniable role in the history of piracy. In their own way, they contributed to the myth of the pirate, shaping the way we imagine the Golden Age of Piracy. These women, though often overlooked by mainstream history, were far from passive. They were active participants in a world that rejected them, fighting not just for treasure, but for agency, autonomy, and survival. And that is why, even centuries later, their stories still captivate us. Historians still debate the extent to which these women were romanticized after their deaths. Were they legends because they were rare exceptions to the rule, or did their stories gain mythic proportions because of the very audacity of their existence? Either way, the legacy of female pirates has been solidified, though not always in the way they would have wanted. The pirate world was harsh and unforgiving, but for those women who carved out a place in it, the sea represented a chance for freedom. Freedom they were often denied on land, and in the myths and legends of their lives, we continue to see that same desire for freedom, adventure, and defiance. As we move forward, let's consider the role of female pirates in the broader mythology of piracy. The tales of these women have often been woven into the fabric of pirate folklore. But how much of this folklore is based on truth and how much is pure embellishment? Are these women remembered for their courage and rebellion, or have their stories been distorted to fit the pirate archetype we know today? The pirate mythos is rich with vibrant imagery, exotic treasure islands, gallant rogues and swashbuckling adventures on the high seas. Yet, among these legends, the stories of female pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read have become more than just historical accounts. They've been elevated to the realm of myth. The idea of a woman pirate defying all societal expectations and leading a crew of ruthless men resonates deeply in the collective imagination. These women were no longer just outlaws. They became symbols of strength, defiance, and freedom. But what does it mean for these women to be remembered in this way? Historians argue that the line between myth and reality has become increasingly blurred. The stories of these women have been romanticized, often elevating their status beyond what was likely true. For example, while it's widely believed that Anne Bonny was a fierce warrior and an integral part of her pirate crew, the specifics of her actions have often been exaggerated. Some accounts portray her as a larger-than-life figure, a woman who could defeat men twice her size with ease. While she was undoubtedly a formidable fighter, the mythologized version of her story often overshadows the realities of piracy. Similarly, the story of Mary Read has been subject to a great deal of embellishment. In the historical record, she's often portrayed as a rebellious woman who defied societal norms by living as a man and later joining a pirate crew. Her story, though fascinating, has often been clouded by the passage of time and the embellishments of those who followed her. Mary Read, like Anne Bonny, has become a figure wrapped in legend, one whose true identity and actions are often lost in the haze of pirate mythology. Historians still argue whether these women were ever truly accepted as equals in their pirate crews, or if they were simply tolerated because of their survival skills and contributions. While some sources claim that Anne and Mary were respected by their male counterparts, others suggest that they had to constantly prove themselves. The truth is likely somewhere in between. The world of piracy was brutal, and survival often depended on strength and skill, regardless of gender. But as these women became iconic figures, the line between historical fact and myth became increasingly difficult to draw. What's important, however, is that the stories of these women have endured. The fact that we continue to talk about them, even in the context of pirate folklore, speaks to their lasting impact on history. These women were not simply footnotes in the history of piracy. They were active participants who reshaped the way we think about the pirate world. Their legacies have been preserved, not just in history books, but in the popular imagination. These pirate queens, though often forgotten or overshadowed by their male counterparts, represent something much larger than themselves. They embody the spirit of rebellion, freedom, and the refusal to be bound by societal norms. And in a way, their legendary status has given them a kind of immortality. As long as the myth of piracy persists, so too will the stories of these daring women who broke the mold and sailed into history. Let's now turn our attention to a question that lingers in the minds of many. What happened to women pirates after they were captured, or after piracy itself faded into the background? Were their stories forgotten? Or did they leave an indelible mark on the world of piracy? This is the part of the story that often gets lost in the shuffle of history. While we remember their dramatic moments on the high seas, the aftermath of their careers as pirates is far less clear. For many female pirates, the end of piracy was an inevitable and tragic outcome. After the British Navy started cracking down on pirates in the early 18th century, many pirate crews were swiftly dismantled. Female pirates, just like their male counterparts, were often captured and sentenced to face the harsh consequences of their actions. The fate of these women was far from glamorous, and their stories, though powerful, were frequently overshadowed by the drama of their pirate exploits. Anne Bonny and Mary Read's capture by the British Navy marked a dramatic turning point in their lives. The women were arrested during a fierce battle at sea and brought to trial for their roles in piracy. Their capture was a rare moment in pirate history, as it showed the vulnerability of pirates, male and female alike, once they were caught. But the aftermath of their capture is still a topic of great debate. While we know that both women were sentenced to hang, Anne Bonny's fate remains shrouded in mystery. Some historians believe she managed to escape from prison, possibly with the help of Calico Jack, while others speculate that she was released due to her pregnancy. The truth is uncertain, and the ambiguity of her final days has only added to her legendary status. Mary Read's fate is more certain. After being captured, she was held in a British prison where she eventually fell ill and died before she could face execution. Her death was a tragic end to a life of defiance and rebellion. It was a reminder of the harsh realities of piracy, where death or imprisonment was the only reward for a life lived outside the law. And yet, despite her untimely death, Mary Read's legacy continued. Her story, though largely forgotten in the history books, remained alive in the folklore surrounding piracy. The idea of a woman who fought and lived as a pirate, breaking all societal rules, resonated with people for generations. But what about the other women who joined pirate crews during the Golden Age of Piracy? The truth is that most of them faded into obscurity. While some may have been forgotten by history, their presence on pirate ships was not without significance. Women on pirate ships often took on important roles, from managing supplies to helping with navigation and combat. Their contributions were vital to the survival of their crews. Yet once piracy as a profession began to wane, many of these women were lost to time. Historians may never know the full extent of their involvement, but it's clear that women played a larger part in piracy than we've often been led to believe. After the fall of piracy in the early 18th century, the world of women pirates became largely irrelevant to history. The focus shifted to the men who fought and died for control of the seas, while the women who had once sailed alongside them were forgotten. For those who survived, life after piracy was often grim. Many were left to struggle with the harsh realities of life in prison, or were forced to return to the very roles they had once fled from. But even in the face of these hardships, the legacies of these women endured, albeit in a much more subtle way. While the stories of Anne Bonny and Mary Read have become some of the most famous tales in the history of piracy, their legacies are just part of the broader, often underappreciated impact that female pirates had on the world of piracy itself. Despite the challenges they faced after capture, and despite the fact that their stories were overshadowed by male pirates in the annals of history, the contributions of women to piracy have not gone entirely unnoticed. The history of female pirates is one of resilience, defiance, and a desire for freedom. For many women, piracy represented an opportunity to escape the rigid confines of society where women were expected to live their lives according to predetermined roles. Piracy, though brutal and unforgiving, offered these women the chance to carve out a life of autonomy and independence, something that was virtually impossible in the structured world of 17th and 18th century society. The role of women in piracy has also been examined through the lens of gender equality, or the lack thereof. While piracy is often portrayed as a lawless and egalitarian world, the reality was that female pirates often faced unique challenges compared to their male counterparts. Some historians argue that women pirates had to work harder to prove their worth, enduring suspicion and prejudice from their male crewmates. Yet others suggest that pirate ships, with their loose hierarchies and focus on survival, may have offered a relatively more egalitarian environment than the rigid societies they had left behind. Historians still debate whether female pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read ever truly achieved equality on pirate ships. Were they viewed as equals, or were they constantly fighting to prove themselves? While the stories of these women suggest they were respected for their courage and skill, the harsh realities of pirate life made it difficult for anyone, regardless of gender, to survive without proving their value. Still, the mere fact that these women existed and that they were able to achieve any level of success in a world that largely excluded them speaks to the unique and rebellious nature of piracy. The stories of female pirates have also helped shape the modern perception of piracy. Over time, women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read have become icons of rebellion and defiance, their stories woven into the larger-than-life fabric of pirate lore. But these women were not just symbols of defiance, they were also real people whose lives were filled with hardship and danger. Their legacy, though sometimes overshadowed by the more famous male pirates, remains an integral part of pirate history. As we look back on their stories, we are reminded of the role that women played in shaping the course of history. Even in the most unlikely of places, the world of piracy may have been a harsh and dangerous one, but for women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, it represented a chance to break free from the limitations of society and live life on their own terms. They were not just participants in the pirate world, they helped to define it. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that continues to captivate us today. Historians still argue whether these women were ever truly accepted as equals in the pirate world, or whether their contributions were minimized in favor of the male pirates who dominated the era. While their stories may not have been given the same prominence as those of the men they sailed alongside, their impact cannot be denied. They proved that women, even in the most lawless and dangerous environments, could rise to the challenge, defy expectations, and leave a lasting mark on history. Now that we've explored the challenges and triumphs of female pirates during a golden age of piracy, let's take a step back and consider their lasting legacy. Although the golden age of piracy eventually came to an end, the stories of these daring women have continued to inspire generations, and their impact can be seen in how we view piracy, rebellion, and gender roles today. But just how has the story of female pirates evolved since their time? For years, the stories of Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and other women pirates remained mostly in the shadows of history, overshadowed by the more celebrated accounts of male pirates, like Blackbeard and Henry Morgan. In the centuries following the Golden Age of Piracy, women pirates were often relegated to the margins, with their stories buried in the archives, rarely brought to light except by a few historians or writers. But as the 20th and 21st centuries unfolded, something interesting began to happen. The allure of piracy, especially the stories of its most rebellious women, began to grow in popular culture. Movies, books, and television shows started to resurrect the names of female pirates, giving them a place in the grand pirate mythology. Anne Bonny and Mary Read became characters in stories where their rebelliousness was celebrated, and their defiance of societal norms was viewed as heroic. Films like Pirates of the Caribbean brought female pirate characters to the forefront, with figures like the character played by Penelope Cruz in the fourth installment of the series. While the characters weren't exact representations of Bonny or Reed, the spirit of female pirates was unmistakably reflected in these portrayals. The swashbuckling, fearless woman in a pirate coat, brandishing a sword and ready to take on any man, became an enduring image of what piracy could represent: freedom, adventure, and a break from the societal restrictions placed on women. Even today, the legacy of female pirates has made its mark on modern culture. In recent years, there's been a growing appreciation for the historical reality behind these stories. Researchers and historians have begun to dig deeper into the lives of female pirates, unearthing forgotten details and providing a more nuanced understanding of their role in piracy. The increasing recognition of these women is part of a broader movement to reclaim the stories of forgotten historical figures, especially women, whose contributions to history have been overlooked. The resurgence of interest in female pirates is not just a cultural trend. It reflects a larger societal shift. The narratives of female pirates challenge traditional notions of gender roles and offer a more complex and inclusive version of history. Women who broke the rules of their time and took to the seas remind us that history is not always shaped by those in power, but often by those who defy the norms. In many ways, these women, who chose a life of piracy in a male-dominated world, were among the first to challenge the restrictive roles that women were expected to play. Historians still debate how these women were viewed in their time, but their legacy today is one of empowerment and defiance. The continued fascination with female pirates speaks to their enduring relevance in modern culture. They remind us that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that have been hidden away, waiting to be rediscovered. Anne Bonny and Mary Read may not have been household names for centuries, but their place in history and in our imaginations is secure. As we look back on their lives, we realize that the pirates of the past, like the women who joined their ranks, were not simply lawless criminals. They were pioneers, breaking boundaries and rewriting the rules of their time. Their stories are a testament to the power of defiance, the strength of the human spirit, and the incredible resilience of women throughout history. As we near the end of this journey through the world of female pirates, it's time to slow things down a bit and reflect on what we've learned. The stories of Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and the many other women who sailed the high seas offer more than just tales of adventure and rebellion. They provide us with a window into a time when women, despite the odds, carved out their own space in a world where they were largely expected to remain passive. Their stories challenge us to rethink how we view history, gender, and the roles women have played in shaping the world. While their lives were often short and their fates tragic, these women were not forgotten entirely. The enduring allure of piracy, mixed with the myth and legend that has built up around them, has ensured that their names continue to echo through history. In a world dominated by men, Anne Bonny and Mary Read proved that women could be fierce, capable, and essential to the pirate world. Their lives may have been overshadowed by their male counterparts, but the way they fought for their place in the world tells us something important about the resilience of the human spirit. Today, as we continue to rediscover the stories of forgotten historical figures, we see how the legacy of female pirates has shaped the way we think about defiance and freedom. The myths surrounding these women have been reimagined to fit modern narratives of empowerment. It's easy to forget that for these women, piracy wasn't a choice made lightly. It was an act of rebellion against the harsh, constricting expectations of their time. For Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and others like them, piracy was not just about treasure or the thrill of adventure. It was a desperate attempt to escape a world that didn't allow them to live on their own terms. In a sense, their lives mirror the struggles many women still face today, fighting for equal recognition, respect, and the freedom to chart their own course in life. As we reflect on their journeys, we realize that their stories are not just tales of the past. They are part of an ongoing conversation about what it means to challenge authority, to fight for autonomy, and to refuse to be bound by the limitations society places on you. The next time you hear a story about a pirate, remember that there were women among them, women who broke the mold and against all odds fought for their place in history. Anne Bonny and Mary Read were not just pirates, they were pioneers, rebels. Now, as we close tonight's journey, remember that these women were more than the myths that have been spun around them. They were real people who faced incredible challenges and in their own way changed the course of history. So as you drift off tonight, think of the pirate ships, the salty air, and the women who fought to be more than what society told them they could be.